Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. So you know I love a good book club, and so this month's feature is The Burning Word. It's by Judith M. Kunst, and I have loved the work that she has done because she is a writer first and foremost, and she is a Christian, but she's taken done the hard work of taking this Christian philosophy and put it through the grid of someone who is from a Jewish lineage. And so I have learned so much from her work, and this book was the beginning of me being introduced to her. And so I thought I'd share it with you. So I'm going to go ahead and start, as I always do, by giving you kind of a sense of what the book is about. And I invite you to go and purchase your copy of the book so that we can read along together. So chapter 1 is called Intimacy, Turn and Return. My encounters with Jewish Midrash began when my writing teacher said to me, "You are reading the Hebrew Bible, but are you reading it with Hebrew eyes?" This teacher was not a rabbi. He was not a priest or even a biblical scholar. He was a writer interested in how language intersects with religion. In other words, how language can shape our experience of, our relationship with, a God we have never seen with our eyes or touched with our hands or talked with face to face. My teacher did not expect me to answer his question. He knew I was not reading with Hebrew eyes because he knew I was a Christian, as he himself was. But he wanted to suggest to me that the tradition behind my own tradition, Judaism, had something vital to offer me as a writer and reader and seeker after God. This book attempts to describe and share that something vital I discovered as I began to explore what it might mean to read the Bible in a different way, a Jewish way. Perhaps not surprisingly, as I set out to encounter this different tradition, I found myself obliged to honestly and continually encounter my own. I couldn't learn to read in a Jewish way without also clearly defining the way a Christian, or at least this Christian, reads. Two vivid images and two short texts, culled both from my initial experience as a Christian and from my subsequent explorations of Judaism, may help explain what I mean. The first image is a 1970s-style portrait of Jesus, cheaply produced yet lifelike and compelling, which hung in my room throughout my childhood. This Jesus had a friendly face with brown skin, unkept hippie-like hair, and eyes I could gaze at for hours. Gazing at Jesus never failed to fill me with a mixture of feelings, joy and pain, peace and conflict, life and more life, that I felt nowhere else. Standing in front of that picture was my way of making real the text of an old hymn with which my mother used to sing me to sleep. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth which will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. As I turned my face towards those kind brown eyes on the wall, the particulars of my young life fuzzed away and faded back. In those moments, the things of earth did indeed grow dim, and at the time this seemed not only strange, but wonderful. My experience of reading the Bible back then, and for many years as an adult, often had a similar kind of gazing quality. I would pull the book from the shelf or pew or the bedside table, open it up either at random or at the thick middle section of Psalms, and flip the pages until I found something that struck me either as familiar or somehow relevant to my own life. Then I would read, sometimes a tiny passage, sometimes a chapter or two. Sometimes I was bored reading just enough to be able to say I'd done it, fulfilling my mysteriously compelling obligation that evangelical churches had drummed into me since childhood. But sometimes I was far from bored. I was enchanted, pulled into that mysterious space I had come to recognize as uniquely God-filled. Later, as an adult, I would learn that the ancient Christian name for this kind of Bible reading is Lectio Divina, a form of meditation that allows everything extraneous to leave the mind and heart as the reader gazes on a single verse or word of Scripture. But by then I wasn't interested in reading. That took me away from what the old hymn called the things of earth. I wanted a Bible that would not dim or deny, but rather sharpen and welcome the particulars of the world I was coming to know. A world of blooming trees and shifting skies, a husband and a child, novels and poems and cancer and wars, oceans, mountains, what's for supper, Wall Street, Washington, the lie I told last night. I wanted to embrace these things and wrestle them into words. Eventually, I would find in the Jewish tradition a way of reading that vigorously welcomes both language and the world to the arena of Scripture study. It's called Midrash, a Hebrew word meaning to search out. The Holy Scriptures abound with gaps, abrupt shifts, and odd syntax that puzzles, even confounds any reader of Scripture. Jewish Midrash views these troubling irregularities not as accidents or errors or cultural disparities to be passed over, but rather as deliberate invitations to grapple with God's revealed word, and by extension to grapple with God himself. Midrash reads the Hebrew Bible not for what is familiar, but for what is unfamiliar, not for what's clear, but for what's unclear, then wrestles with the text passionately, playfully, and reverently. Midrash views the Bible as one side of a conversation started by God, containing an implicit invitation, even command, to keep the conversation, argument, story, poem, prayer going. Early in my encounters with Midrash, I came across a second image of God to set beside the dreamy-eyed Jesus of my youth. I found it not in a picture on the wall, but in the pages of a book, the Talmud, the 20-volume collection of laws, legends, folk tales, and Bible commentary that the Jewish tradition reveres as the vibrant record of its millennia-long conversation with God. The Talmud says that God himself studies the Bible every day. It says God is sitting in the Bet Midrash, the study house, wearing a round black cap and holding an open Bible, arguing and wrestling his own text right alongside learned rabbis throughout the ages. Here was a God who not only sanctioned my newly daring, honest dialogue with Scripture, he wanted to join me. Turn it and turn it again, the Talmud says of the Scriptures, for everything is contained therein. This short but potent proverb was written not long after Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE, when Jews were scattered abroad and could no longer worship at the temple, God's dwelling place. A group of surviving rabbis during this upheaval managed to safeguard the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, dictated to Moses and given to Israel on Mount Sinai. They recognized that while the temple and all its practices were gone, the ancient book that defined the shape of Jewish life was present, potent, and portable. These rabbis, and later many others who joined them, revered Torah as the place where God had taken refuge, had made a new home. They set about the ingenious and daunting task of reinterpreting its words to help them make sense of a life in exile. If the Holy One, blessed be He, lives in the Scriptures, then no part of its text, no matter how confusing, can be devoid of meaning. Every word, every letter of the text has been put there by divine purpose. Moreover, the tradition assumes, there is no problem or circumstance that cannot be solved by faithful study of Torah. Turn it and turn it again, for everything is contained within. Anchored in Israel's painful journey, the vibrant study practice called Midrash puts human imagination to work to illuminate the hidden, holy meanings of Scripture, meanings that even today help us to make sense of our own confusing contemporary world. So I'd like to end this conversation today with an assignment, if you will, a way to put what I just read into practice. And feel free to email me what your responses are. Study, imagination, conversation with a hidden God. Each of these can be helped along with pen and paper in hand. The ancient records of Jewish Midrash could most simply be described as huge communal journals, wherein small sections of the Bible were written out and reflected upon by many readers. Physically writing or typing out a verse that troubles or excites you, leaving plenty of blank margins around the words, is a good way to begin the Midrashic conversation with Scripture. So that being said, I'd like to invite you to either take a verse that you might have heard, or to take Psalm 51, read it, and choose a verse that you might have a little bit of conversation that you'd like to have around it. And take the time to just sit with it, to write it slowly, to read it, to let it ring in your ears. And then be willing to just sit with it with no preconceived notion of what you believe it to mean. All right, thank you so much for stopping by. Make sure, please, to hit the notification button if you would like all of the videos that go along with this particular conversation. And feel free to check out my playlist, because there are other types of conversations that I am having that might be of an encouragement to you and your friends.